What is up, guys? EJ Stewart here, joined by Kendall Stewart. Today, we're going to be giving you guys our comparisons for some of the top players in the NBA draft this year. And Kendall, we love doing this video. We love kind of looking at these players and trying to find comparisons to guys not just currently playing in today's NBA, but guys that have played in yesteryear. It's always the easiest, one of the more talked about things to do is to make comparisons to some of these players. So excited to have you on. Excited to get into the nitty gritty with these guys.
Yeah, no, I mean this is always an exciting challenge. Like you said, I mean EJ, you're especially very good at pulling out some old school comps. I've thrown out some old school ones here or there. Um, I remember the I comped Obi Toppin to Kenyon Martin.
Yeah,
You
I
know,
remember that.
uh, I remember I threw out a Bobby Jackson comp. I don't even remember who it was, but so there's been some old school references. I know you've had some deep cuts as well. So
Yeah, I had a Ralph
we'll see if we
Sampson.
have
I think
any
I
today.
had a Ralph Sampson last year for Evan Mobley. So
Yeah.
that was a neat
Well,
one.
I know. I think I had Ralph
Oh, do you have Ralph Sampson? Oh, I thought that was me. Okay,
Yeah, yeah. I forgot which one you had for Evan Mobley,
okay,
but
right? Maybe it was
and well, I
Bruce.
mean, I don't know. He's not 7'4", so you'll never find a great Ralph Sampson comp. But
Yeah. So this is always one of our more fun videos to do. So happy we get to do it again this year as we're getting closer and closer to this year's draft. So we're gonna do it a little differently this year. So we're gonna pick mostly different players so we can get through as many guys as possible. So I'll start first. When you talk about the 7 foot plus players, I'll begin with Chet Holmgren here, and this is a tricky one. There are a lot of guys that some people easily run to for Chet Holmgren. Of course, the 7 foot shot blocking swingman 3 point shooting player for Gonzaga, very much akin to the unicorn Kristaps Porzingis. But I'm gonna move away from that comparison. I'm gonna go to a different guy, and again, Kendall knows when I do these comps, I try to get these guys similar to their age group or similar to when they were playing around the same time. And Chet Holmgren reminds me a lot of Kevin Garnett, honestly. And if you think about Kevin Garnett when he came into the NBA, people forget Kevin Garnett started at small forward his rookie year and his second year in the NBA. Tom Gugliotta was playing the four. Kevin Garnett was so thin they didn't think he could deal with the physicality of playing in the post consistently, especially in that NBA, much more rugged NBA. And if you think about that rail thin with the fade haircut and the part, that KG, I think there are a lot of similarities to how they move, how they operate on the perimeter to Chet Holmgren. KG might be a little bit more of a fluid athlete and probably a little bit more explosive athlete, but I think you see with the ball handling, ball skills, abilities, they are very similar in that aspect. I think Chet definitely has a better jump shot than KG at this point in time, especially in terms of long distance. But when you think about KG's shot potential, we saw how great he became as a mid-range shooter. I think there are plenty of similarities between these two players. We both know the defensive impact of KG and Kevin Garnett. So for my first comparison, I'm doing Chet Holmgren to Kevin Garnett, a young KG starting out with the Wolves.
coming out hot, EJ. I mean, that's a comp that I have not heard once. You gave a very detailed explanation. I feel like you probably just saw the Adam Sandler movie Hustle, and it reminded you of Uncut Gems.
I actually did. Actually, ironically, I did not yet. That's funny you said that. I
Oh,
gotta
you have
watch it.
not seen
I've been
it.
working all weekend, so I haven't been able to check it out. But yeah,
But but yeah, no, I mean, I do like it. Obviously, I'm a Celtics fan, big KG guy. But like you said, we're not talking about Celtics KG. We're talking about KG at 18 years old when he got into the NBA.
yep,
Like you said, rail in, 180 pounds soaking wet.
yep.
Now that reminds you of somebody else. I don't know if he has the problem with Chet is does he have the frame to bulk up like Kevin Garnett
Yeah,
did, like Anthony Davis did. That'll be the question. Um, but yeah, and then will he ever get the back to the basket game that KD had?
right.
That'll be the
And
other.
and and that's going to be interesting because with Chet, is he's playing a different NBA. Like now if he was
Yeah,
playing in 1996 when KG came into the league, maybe he would be forced to get a back to back game that KG had developed. Now he might not have to, which is why he may be again more akin to that young KG for the majority of his career, which is I think
right.
a fascinating thing to think about how that KG would have adjusted to this NBA.
Yeah. So my first comp, you're going with the projected number one, number two pick. I'm going with guy who will probably go a little bit after that. Paolo Banchero, out of Duke, the forward. My con for Paolo Banchero. I know EJ, you've thrown out Michael Beasley before, earlier in the season. The one I've always said all year, man, it's Blake Griffin. But not Blake Griffin coming out of Oklahoma. Not Blake Griffin early with the Clippers, but I'm talking Blake Griffin his last hurrah with the Clippers early in Detroit, um, where we're talking about a guy that is still a very good athlete, and that's what Paolo Banchero is, because he doesn't have the supercharged hops that Blake Griffin had coming out of Oklahoma
Right.
that he had early in his career. He's not going to have those highlight moments, but we're talking about a guy with an ability to handle the basketball at a high level for his position. That's what Blake Griffin had developed late on the latter part of his prime years. An ability to shoot from all three levels. Could be a master in the mid range, a face up nightmare because of his quickness and his handling ability and his pull up jump shot. Mixed with the strength and athleticism. I mean, the body type is very similar.
Yeah.
The athletic profile is very similar to that version of Blake Griffin. So, but then also bit of a defensive liability. You probably wish he was a better rebounder than given the physical prowess. Um, and I think there's probably still upside for him to grow in that regard. But it's a weird comp because I'm comparing him to a guy that's 30 years old.
Yeah.
So you're wondering where does the growth happen? And maybe the growth happens in his skills continue to develop even further than where Blake's did, or maybe the growth happened. That's where the Carmelo Anthony comps come in, or the Paul
Right.
Pierce comps that we've heard a little bit from Paolo. Is that he's at Blake Griffin, where Blake Griffin was in his prime, where he's an All Star. The skills are kind of similar already, and he's only 19. If those can continue to develop, now we're talking about a guy who, again, mellow. People throwing at Jason Tatum, like, sounds crazy now, but at 25, 26, who knows how good he could be offensively. And I've liked your Michael Beasley comp. The only
Yeah.
thing that I've always said is that from a talent perspective, it's very similar. Just the reason why it feels off is because Beasley didn't have the basketball IQ or just the makeup to to play at a high level consistently. Um, Whereas I think Paolo has that advantage, but I think from a talent perspective and a game perspective, very similar strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah, I think people will be a little surprised by the Blake comparison, but I do like the ball school aspect of it. That late Blake Griffin last year playing with Chris Paul, maybe first year away from Chris Paul, like he was an excellent passer, really underrated. And I think that's actually Paolo's most underrated skill set. I mean, he made some wonderful dishes to Mark Williams, to a lot of those guys on Duke, and that high low game they had was killer. I don't think it's a crazy comparison. Don't think about the Sports Center Blake Griffin. Think about the Blake Griffin you watched for 48 minutes during those last few years in the Clippers. I do see some of that from Kendall's comp there. Speaking of Duke players, let's go to another Duke player I just mentioned, Mark Williams, the 7-foot shot blocker for the Blue Devils. This one, when I watched the film, very clear as day. Probably the easiest comparison I have of any player in this draft. Mark Williams reminds me of Tyson Chandler. Tyson Chandler is a guy I got to watch plenty playing for the New York Knicks. My New York Knicks got to watch him plenty playing for the Dallas Mavericks. And he's played on a lot of high-end teams, so we've just seen a lot of Tyson Chandler. I think of a guy who can control the paint with his shot blocking ability. I think about his ability as a true lob threat, a guy with just immense stretchability, vertical stretchability because of the way you can just throw it up there to him. Tyson Chandler really kind of ushered in some ways, along with Dwight Howard and such, kind of a new way of playing the center position. And Mark Williams, to me, is right along those same lines. I mean, they're both just tenacious finishers, two-hand, one-handed around the basket, and you see plenty of just highlight reel dunks from Mark Williams. Again, I mentioned the shot blocking ability. And I think you saw Tyson Chandler win a Defensive Player of the Year. He's been an All NBA Defensive Player. Mark Williams, I think, has that kind of potential as a back anchor for a strong defense. So this one was clear as day. Tyson Chandler, pick whichever one you want. Not obviously late in his career, but you could tell me, Tyson Chandler with the Knicks, Tyson Chandler with the Mavericks. Even going back to when he was in New Orleans, I see a very similar
Chicago.
player in Mark Williams. I mean, Chicago, when he was young, yeah. I mean, I think that, Chicago, he was a little more raw there. I don't think he maybe knew some of the defensive nuances that come with being a five-man, but he was a great shot blocker
Right.
still. Like, I think you see a lot of that. The only reason why I'll go maybe a little later is because Chandler also came into the league real thin. Mark Williams is pretty he's not built, but he surprised people with the body fat stuff.
That's
I
what I
think
was gonna say.
he's a little more ready to play. I think in the NBA than Tyson Chandler was when he first came into the league.
You know me. I mean, we've talked about it during the season. The guy that always came to mind with me because he was a hard guy to peg because the center position is kind of extinct. So like you can't really go with a guy now. There aren't many guys 7'1", that are playing at a high level. I always say Greg Oden is who he just eerily reminds me
Oh,
of the way he
interesting.
plays, he moves on the court. Just never he's not as good. And I know that
Right.
sounds crazy, like he's a poor man's Greg Oden, because Greg Oden, is not a superstar, but
Right.
he's the number one pick of the draft for a reason, people.
Right.
So, that's the thing. He's not, Mark Williams wouldn't have been the number one pick in 2007 either, but
Right.
there is a hint of Greg Oden in
Yeah,
there,
I actually like that. Yeah, I agree with that.
finishing and the shot blocking. And like you said, he's bigger than Tyson Chandler, but I also don't think he's as big and strong as Greg Oden was.
No.
So it totally shows you again, Greg Oden was different. But for my second comp, I'm going with Jaden Ivey. Most people's top guard, in this draft, projected to be the first guard picked in this year's draft. And we've heard a lot about Ja Morant. Obviously can't confuse the hair, the similarities. Obviously, his mom coached Ja Morant with the Grizzlies at one point. So, clearly I think he emulates Ja Morant's game, but I'm not going to go with this guy looks like that guy comp today. Today I'm going with Victor Oladipo.
Oh,
Victor
okay.
Oladipo, um, I feel like with Jaden Ivey, one of my bigger questions with Jaden Ivey is his ability to play point guard.
Right.
Is he does he have the does he have just the basketball IQ, the feel for the game, or really more so than basketball IQ to play the point guard position at the NBA level, mixed with the handle, the jump shot, all that combined to play point guard in today's NBA? I don't know. But regardless, I don't think that's going to stop him from being a very, very effective high level NBA player, whether it's at the one or the two. And I think Victor Oladipo had a lot of those same questions coming out of Indiana, where people wanted him to be Russell Westbrook. Orlando
Right.
was drafting him like, well, I guess we're going to turn him into a point guard, even though he didn't never once played point at Indiana. Ivy's had way more time on the ball at Purdue than Oladipo did at Indiana, which should serve him well.
Yeah.
Um, but I feel like I think his long term future is probably going to be off the ball at the two spot, and more like Oladipo in Indiana, which is still an all star player or a guy he could still handle the ball at a high level, and run your offense at certain points of the game. But I think you'll also need another point guard next to him. But the supercharged athleticism, the ability to finish with either hand, above the rim, below the rim, a developing jump shot. The one thing that I think obviously Ivy's going to have to work on is just the competitive temperament defensively. That
Exactly. That's exactly what I'm thinking
Oladipo
about.
is a dog.
Yep.
Oladipo gets down in the stance, and good luck trying to score on that guy, particularly coming out of Indiana. And Ivy he does not have that right now in his game, and so he's gonna have to work on that. But when you get to the NBA, and you're trying to carve out a niche, I think he kind of has to, because unless he's getting drafted by a team where they're asking him to be Ja Morant, then he's gonna have to probably be a bigger piece on the defensive side of the ball. So that's going to be the thing for Jaden Ivey, but that's the player that I see when I watch Jaden Ivey.
I definitely like it from an offensive standpoint. I think another thing with those two guys was, what is the shooting believable and real? Both guys I think shot the ball better than people expected in their sophomore years. So will that continue was a question for Oladipo, especially because he didn't have nearly as much value as even Ivy did. And I think it's still a question for Ivy, especially when we saw those numbers kind of fall off a cliff a little bit towards the end of the season. I think a good comparison overall. Both extremely great athletes and both guys who can get to the rim at will. Let's get to another guard in this draft, a guy who I know draft fans certainly have heard a lot of. Maybe people not so immersed in draft culture, maybe not have heard much about this name. But I want to talk about a guy who I really like in this draft, a guy who you may be hearing in a different video talking about sleepers. Ryan Rollins, it's guard out of Toledo, about 6'3", 6'4", really good one-on-one game. For me, when you watch this guy's game, He's very akin to a guy that is playing in the NBA Finals, Jordan Poole. And you think about Jordan Poole, I think Rollins is actually better than Jordan Poole was at Michigan. But when I think of who Jordan Poole kind of is now for the Warriors, a kind of dynamo guy who just comes in and just looks for his own shot and looks to score, regardless of who's out there, because that's what the Warriors need. They need a guy outside of Steph Curry who can create their own shot. I think Rollins possesses some of that similar ability. They have a very similar physical profile. They're both about 6'3", 6'4", both guys with pretty nice one-on-one games. Rollins, it may actually be because it's a college game, so you're allowed to take more mid-range jump shots. He may be a little better in the mid-range, where Poole may be a little bit better from deep. I think you'll see Rollins extend that range and be a very good three-point shooter. But I just think about a guy who's tough to guard, a guy who's aggressive, a guy with a really slick handle in the one-on-one kind of game. I see a similar player when I watch the Golden State Warriors and I watch Jordan Poole attacking team second units, attacking team second or third best defenders and cooking them guys. I think Rollins could end up carving a very similar role in the NBA. Really like Rollins' game. We've talked some about Jordan Poole. I'm surprised he's even come out to be this good. I think that when you see Rollins play in the NBA, you may be seeing a very similar player.
I'm also a fan of Ryan Rollins' game as well. Like you said, we'll be hearing more about him on our channel at some point. But I do like the comp. Both the way Rollins plays is not very modern, and it sounds weird because obviously he's a high volume ball handler, but I don't think he's gonna be a point guard. So I think a guy off the ball like that who's a high volume dribbler, those guys don't really grow on trees as much in today's NBA. So that's going to be the question with him. And our archetype like Jordan Poole is a guy that kind of needs the ball in his hands,
Yep.
To be effective. Jordan Clarkson even is another guy that can kind of has that same similar archetype as well. Those are the guys that he's going to have to sort of follow that blueprint. But yeah, my next guy, another projected lottery pick, Benedict Mathurin. It's interesting because Benedict Mathurin's a guy that I'm very high on.
Yes.
And sometimes you hear comps, and just like EJ's Michael Beasley, Paolo comp, you hear it and you say to yourself, well, you must not like the player then because you think he's Michael Beasley, and that's not necessarily the case. I'm just saying this is who he reminds me.
Yeah.
In this case, for me, I think Benedict Mathurin is better than the player I'm comping him to. Okay. But I think that there are similarities in this guy's game, and this guy's he's a good player. There's other players that there are plenty of players in this archetype that I could have compared him to in general, but the guy he reminds me of is Malik Beasley, who's a good player, but I think Malik Beasley without a lot of the baggage and with the all the other stuff that comes with Malik Beasley that probably stops him from being a top 10 shooting guard in the NBA or a top whatever you want to call him shooting guard in the NBA. And there were other guys I thought I could have went to Terrence Ross. I could have went to J.R. Smith. Like I think he's in that archetype of player, but with more, I think he's got more, whatever you want to call it, intangibles, I guess is the simple way of putting it, more grit than those guys have had. Those guys have shown. And also with a guy like Terrence Ross, he's a weird case because we've never really seen him play on any sort of competitive team. So I don't know. Maybe Terrence Ross does have a lot of those winning qualities that we'll never
he's
see.
Just been stuck in Orlando and playing for.
Yeah, he's been stuck in Orlando
before Kawhi showed up and everybody got good.
Yeah. So, but when it comes to the Malik Beasley comp, I think the difference between a guy like Ross and Beasley, because those were the two guys I was kind of floating in between. Beasley gets to the rim more than Terrence Ross. Terrence Ross settles for a lot of jump shots.
That is true.
I think Mathurin is a little bit more of a downhill player than Terrence Ross is, and so that's where Malik Beasley can comes more into play. Particularly Malik Beasley coming out of Florida State. He was not the perimeter jump shooter that he is now. So he was relied a lot more on his athleticism. I think Mathurin is a much better player than Malik Beasley was coming out of FSU. He's one and done. Mm-hmm. Mathurin 2 years, but Pac-12 Player of the Year. I'm a huge fan of Benedict Mathurin. I think if he goes to the right situation with his skill set, the ability to shoot, the athleticism, the ability to finish at the rim, the aggressiveness, the physical profile, I think you're talking about a guy who could be an all-star shooting guard.
I like the comp. I like the comp a lot. Another guy I would throw out there, Jason Richardson. Think about the
Interesting.
athleticism. Think about the long
Interesting.
distance shooting.
Now, Jason Richardson, that's another level of athlete. Is Benedict
Yeah, I
Mathurin on?
mean, Jason
Are
Richardson
we talking Jason
isn't.
Richardson maybe a notch below athletically though?
Yeah, maybe a notch below athletic. I mean, you saw what Mathurin did to TCU. Some of them dunks he had. I mean, he
We
can get
did, we
up.
did,
Uh,
we did.
it was probably like Jason Richardson is like the 99.99999%
Yeah,
type of athlete.
that's
I
like
don't know if
Shaden Sharp. I mean,
yeah.
Shaden Sharp's in that athletic profile
Yeah, that's your Shaden Sharp,
category.
your Jalen Green, like that type of guy. Mathurin's probably a little below that. That's why when I thought Jason Richardson, I really actually didn't even think of like the slam dunk champion. I thought maybe a couple years after that when he's playing for the We Believe Warriors. And he's still
Right,
getting dunks and stuff, but he's also like really a 3-point shooter at that point. Like you think of Jason Richardson
right.
at
Big
that
time.
point of his career, playing for Don Nelson, maybe the first year in Phoenix, when he thought he was still Jason Richardson. If you remember, LeBron blocked his 360 still the greatest block I've ever seen in an NBA game. Blocking a 360 dunk and pinning him is just ridiculous. But anyway, think about that. Jason Richardson playing for Phoenix early on or last few years in Golden State. I see some similarities there with Matthew, but I do like the Beasley comp for sure. Staying on some other guys here, I'm gonna move to a player that we haven't spoke about much on this YouTube channel yet, but a
At
guy
all, I
who,
think.
yeah, I don't think we talked about him at all, but teams are starting to really like him, and you're seeing his name pop up in first rounds. Jake Laravia, small forward, power forward type out of Wake Forest. Definitely some really nice things about his game. This when I watched the film of him, also it struck me. I was like, wow, this looks like a guy, and this is a guy I can know. This name you definitely have not thought about for the last 15 years. I can say that almost for a fact,
Last
or at least
15.
maybe 10, maybe 15 is too much. I'll say at least 10. But Jake Laravia reminds me a lot of Andres Nocioni. Andres Nocioni, former
Wow.
player for the
So
Chicago Bulls.
so I'm gonna challenge you for a second, real quick.
Okay.
He did play with Luka Doncic at Real Madrid, so I did think about him. But
Oh wow,
just
I
to you,
didn't know. I didn't even. I forgot he was playing for Real Madrid.
not his last year at Real Madrid, but his first year playing with
Yeah,
Real
I didn't.
Madrid
I didn't.
before he beat eligible.
I didn't even think about the post Andres Nocioni NBA career.
Yeah,
But so that shows you how much of a basketball Savant Kendall is. He knows the full roster of everybody in the EuroLeague. But Andres Nocioni, I think, and Jake Laravia very similar. You think about number one, the shooting, the stretch ability. Both guys were kind of tweeners. They're both 3-4 type of guys. I actually think Andres Nocioni may have had a better time in this NBA, and he was a decent player in the NBA. But he might have had a better time even this NBA than that NBA where he was not necessarily. Some of the three men were so athletic. Maybe he wasn't the greatest matchup for them, but he was strong enough to guard a lot of fours. A little bit between. I think Jake Laravia is in a similar boat. Both guys really strong defenders. Not both guys probably not good against the quicker guys, but against the guys who are a little more physical, a little more strong. Nocioni was just. He want to talk about a guy with some dog. I mean, Nocioni was a dog on the defensive end on the glass. Laravia shows some of that similar ability defensively when he can stay in front of those type of guys. Is why I think you'll see him playing a lot of four. And like I said, the stretch ability, the some of the flashing of the pick and pop game. Laravia is extremely fundamentally sound, extremely highly efficient. Nocioni was a highly efficient player when he played in the NBA. Similar size, similar frame, similar lack of athleticism, to be honest. To me, another one that, like, when I found it, I was like, wow, yeah, he reminds me very much of Andres Nocioni back in the day.
yeah. I mean, I really like that comp. I mean, I promised we were gonna get a deep cut, and
Yep.
EJ delivered a deeper cut than I expected. Because, like you said,
There you go.
Nocioni, not a name I've heard in years, and EJ delivered. And I see a lot of the similarities, like you said, physical profile, skill set, and you mentioned like Nocioni. He was, I mean, he was in the NBA for a good amount, had a role, but I think wasn't as appreciated as he probably would be now. And I think we're seeing that with Jake Laravia's stock.
Right.
A guy like him would have been a late second round pick probably in that era, and now we're talking about him as early second round, late first round potentially. So interesting how you can have that's what I love about the comp exercise. You can have a guy and you say he's the exact same player as this guy 20 years ago, but this guy is viewed as a much better player now than he was back then.
Yeah, it's like a
So
time. It's like a time capsule when you watch some of these players today and think about, man, this guy, this is just that guy from 20 years ago. But in this new way we play basketball, he actually has maybe a better shot at sticking. It's really interesting.
yeah, the last guy for me, or not the last guy, but the fourth guy for me, I should say, Christian Braun, wing out of Kansas. I think he's a very underrated prospect. We'll probably be diving into that a little bit more as well in the future. But um, it's an interesting one because there are a couple guys that I thought about, um, but I could have went very far back with guys like with a guy like Christian Brown, but I honestly didn't have to go very far back at all.
Okay,
Think there's a pretty obvious one out there in my mind, but to me, I think it's Grayson Allen. I
I
think
knew you were
Grayson
going there.
Allen is the guy. The way, and that's the thing is that
So
Grayson
much, so much,
Allen.
so much, so much for that. I'm not gonna pick the guy who looks like the guy. That went out. That went away 10 minutes
Yeah.
later.
I mean, well, and that's the thing, man. I thought like, man, I'm not gonna be, the guy who's just gonna the white wing. I'm a guy compare him to another, white wing that's athletic. But that's where we fell. But I think that the comparisons are too obvious. I think
Yeah.
his ability to shoot with the elite athleticism
Right.
at the wing spot. I've seen some other comps out there that I'm not as big a fan of. I've heard Kevin Herter. I don't think he's as good of a shooter as Kevin
Yeah.
Herter.
No. Kevin
Not
Herter is
coming out of Maryland,
an excellent
and I
shooter.
don't
Yeah.
think I think he's way more athletic than Kevin Herter is personally.
Definitely. I do too.
So and that to me it wipes it out immediately. Now we always have to understand that athleticism at the college level versus the NBA level is going to look very different.
Yep.
Nick Stauskas didn't look like he looked like a decent athlete in Michigan, and then he's stuck in the mud playing in the NBA.
Yeah.
But when I look at Christian Brown and Grayson Allen was the kind of athlete that transcended college basketball. In terms of his athleticism, he was that was going to translate to the NBA level, and it has for the most part. Um, but then also his ability to shoot it is really what has kept Grayson Allen not only in the league but as a guy that can be a contributor on a playoff team at a high level. I think when you talk about Brown, I think his shooting ability really is going to be the swing trait for him. He's never gonna be a guy. I mean, I don't want to put any limits on him, but I don't think he's ever gonna be a guy that averages 25 points a game
Yeah.
or is your number one or even number two option. But doesn't mean he can't start for your team and be a piece that provides spacing, um, that provides a guy who can fill the lanes in transition, a lob threat, guy who can defend at a high level. He gives you a lot of traits that are very important in today's NBA. But the shooting is going to be the thing that makes or breaks whether or not he can be a high level contributing NBA piece. But Grayson Allen, it was the same situation, and Allen has become a knockdown shooter now in Milwaukee.
Yeah, I think I think it's a good comparison. I was joking with you with the guy who looks alike, but yeah, no, I think when you watch Christian Brown, especially when you saw the deep run they went on, you think about Grayson Allen, his first year at Duke, and some of the things he was able to do to help Duke win that national championship. Very, very much similarities exist between those two players.
Fiery
So
competitors too.
both very fiery competitors, absolutely. Both guys play with a little bit of an edge. Maybe Allen takes it a little too far, but I think that you could definitely say that about both
That's
players.
what we call tripping people nowadays. DJ Edge.
Tripping people and whatever the hell he did to our guy Caruso.
Caruso.
Yeah, that's called edge, I guess. But definitely both guys play with a little bit of a nastiness. I like the comparison for sure. Last one is going to be a dual comparison. Me and Kendall both felt like we had very strong comparisons for Ousmane Dieng.
Probably have the same guy.
I'm assuming we have the same guy. Kendall, when we started doing this, when we started doing the prep for this, Kendall said I have a really great guy for Dieng, and I was like, that's funny because when I watched Dieng a couple weeks ago, I didn't write it. I don't know if I wrote it down, but I was like, oh, this is very clear what this comparison is. And so I was like, well, I want to have a comparison. So we don't know who it is
I'll
for
give you
each guy.
a thumbs up for I'll give you a thumbs up or a thumbs down after you say it, whether or not we have the same guy or not.
So Ousmane Dieng from France, playing in New Orleans, did just play in New Zealand. This one is very easy to me. 6'9", long, lanky, definitely some raw ability, but the ball skills are there. He's got to be Nick Batum, another Frenchman. There you go. Give me a thumbs up there. Yeah, another Frenchman. Nick Batum also came out very raw. He didn't play New Zealand, but both guys from France, both a little raw. But I mean, similar profile. He's like 6'9", 185. That's pretty much around where Nick Batum was when he first got to Portland. And again, don't think about the stretch for Nick Batum, who's gotten a little thicker, plays a little bit. 5 actually playing with the Clippers sometimes. That's not the guy we're talking about. We're talking about Nick Batum when he came into the league and was a much more raw player who's focused more on defending. A lot of guys on the perimeter. I think you'll see Dieng be pigeonholed maybe early on whenever he gets to get on the court as to being a guy who could defend multiple positions, a switchable type of player. Batum was that years ago. And I think that honestly, I think the potential that people see in Dieng, I think that's what you hope to see. Batum got that crazy contract, but he got that crazy contract because he played pretty damn well. And I think that there was a lot of hope that Batum could become an all-star caliber player, and he was probably right below that before he got that contract. I think Dieng, because of the physical traits, I think because of the foundation of some really, really positive offensive skills. I mean, I know the numbers look ugly, but then there are some games where he hits 4 or 5 threes in a row, and you're like, okay, this guy clearly has game. It's just a matter of teaching him how to play and getting him to do this consistently. I think he's a very intriguing player. I'm very curious where he goes in this draft. But when it came to comps, as Kendall would agree, this one, easy as pie. Ousmane Dieng, Nick Batum.
Yeah, to me, this is a situation where the truth is in the tape.
Yep.
When you just watch it, you watch the tape on Ousmane Dieng. I think you see a guy that is clearly, uh, he has, like you said, the Batum ball handling ability. For at the time it was really rare for a guy his size. Now it's
Yes.
becoming a little bit more prevalent, but but he has the rare handle for a guy with his size. Like you said, the thin frame. Um, not a special athlete, but very fluid.
Right.
Really, fluid finisher around the rim. Just a lot of things that when you watch it, you say to yourself, that's Nick Batum, and then you mentioned, like you said, there's flashes of shot creation that, you know, obviously Nick Batum in his prime could bring some stuff out, but even Nick Batum early in his career, not really much of that.
No.
For the most part, it was mostly catch and shoot. So Dieng shows possibly some even further offensive upside. So if he can unlock that, now we're talking about a guy that if you're telling me yeah, Nick Batum, but he also can create his own shot at a high level. Now we're talking about a guy that can average 20 points a game. But right now, I think he should just be focused on being Nick Batum because that, like you said, could make you a lot of money
Oh
in today's
yeah.
NBA. And I think Nick Batum also similar to not as much as Nocioni, but I think even more so, he probably even be even more valuable in today's NBA in his prime than he was, you know,
Oh yeah.
6 years ago.
Yeah, because I think a lot of those kind of players that were drafted during that time, those were, to me, evaluators and teams kind of looking to the future. Like, I think they knew where the game was going, and they were trying to find those type of guys. And, sometimes those guys, like, they're still playing an old man game, so sometimes maybe they didn't reach the potential you wanted. Some guys did, or some guys, like I talked about with KG at the top of this video, which is a kind of a good coming full circle moment. They adjust to how the game is being played, despite them being kind of this mold of play. You're right. I think that there's a guy like Batum who at that time maybe was kind of not playing in the right kind of NBA for his skill set, but figured it out. Now Dieng is in a perfect kind of NBA to figure out his skill set. When we think of how many teams employ multiple ball handlers, how many teams switch defensively 1 through 4, sometimes teams switch 1 through 5. When you think about teams that want stretchability from guys playing at the 4 and 5 position, which is Dieng could be playing a lot of 4 in this league. It's all there. So I think that Bassoon was an easy comp. I'm glad that we came to an agreement without talking to each other about what the pick was. We just knew that it was easy for us. I think that shows the strength in that comparison. But I want to thank you guys for checking out this NBA draft comp video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Of course, if you like this video, make sure you give us a like. Comment in the comment section. What do you think of these comparisons? Do you have different guys for these players? Do you have different players that you want to compare to other NBA players? What do you want to say, Kendall?
And then I was gonna say also, if we let us know if there's anybody else, because obviously we left off guys like Jabari Smith,
Right,
and
exactly.
AJ Griffin and Jalen Duren and Johnny Davis. There's plenty of other players that we could throw out comps for. If there's anybody else, if we do a part two that you want to see, who we comp them to, let us know in the comments, and we'll make sure to throw them into the next one.
Very, very smart words there, Kendall. Thank you for saying that. That's going to do it for now, though. Thank you guys for checking us out. For Kendall, I'm EJ. Take it easy, guys. Peace.